So now that the recording is on, I will formally welcome you to Talking Data Equity for Friday, August 4th. I am Heather Krause. I'm coming to you today from Toronto, and Talking Data Equity is absolutely one of my favorite parts of the week. It is an informal gathering that we host most Fridays, not every single Friday, but a lot of Fridays, we host this gathering. And the idea is for anybody who is a practitioner of data equity, is curious about data equity, is trying in some practical, concrete way to align the work that they're doing in a data project with the values and communities that they're trying to center. And sometimes we have a technical discussion, and sometimes we have a guest speaker. And today is the latter. We are having a set of guest speakers. And I'm going to be really transparent here and say that I'm actually quite sick. I do not have COVID. I did one Talking Data Equity with COVID, but I do not have COVID. I just have a late summer fever, sore throat. So I'm not in my usual place. You can see my background is a weird kind of preset background. And because of that, I don't have the formal introduction that I was going to use for these folks. So I'm going to give an informal introduction. I'm going to turn it over to them and let them introduce themselves. But I can say with a great deal of excitement that this is a group of people from the Colorado Immersion Training and Community Engagement. And some of these people you will already know. Regular Talking Data Equity attendees. Leslie Wright is here from Kaiser Permanente, and Leslie has helped me think through some really important concepts and ideas in data equity, and is a real a person who walks the talk very much. And of course, Dr. Bruno Sobral, I also know quite well, regular Talking Data Equity attendee and contributor. I don't even know how to start explaining what Bruno does, but he thinks very, very deeply about the reality of systems in health equity. And Jamie and Crystal, I am just meeting today for the first time, so unfortunately I can't give you a proper introduction. And the last thing I'll say is logistically, if you're new, if this is your first Talking Data Equity, how this works is that we're going to turn it over to our guest speakers and allow them to share their stories with us, accompanied by some slides. During that period, we ask that you stay on mute and feel free to use the Zoom chat all you want. You can ask questions, make comments, talk to other people. And after they're done sharing, with whatever amount of time there is left, and there's a lot of people in our group today, so there won't be a giant amount of time left. That's when, if you want to ask a question and come off mute, you can just raise your hand and do that. All right. Thank you so much for all of your patience and generosity, as always. So I'm going to turn it over to the Colorado Immersion Training and Community Engagement Group, specifically Leslie.
Heather, thank you so much, and welcome everybody. It's such a pleasure and honor to be presenting today. I wish you well, Heather. Take care of yourself. And I just want to thank you for inviting us to do this. And this has been a real group effort. So I'm going to turn it over to Bruno to get started. And then each of us will have a role. And at that time, we'll introduce ourselves. So Bruno.
Thank you, Leslie. And hello, everybody. I will echo what Leslie just said. It's a huge honor to be able to share with you all. And so if I could go straight to the next slide, Leslie. So thank you. So we're going to go through this slide. We're going to go through some brief introductions. So my name is Bruno Sobral. I serve as the academic director of the Immersion Training Program, and I'm from Brazil. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background and then hand it over to Crystal and Leslie and Jamie. And you can see from this slide that they represent both the community research liaisons, which is a term that we use that you'll hear more about and you'll understand by the time we finish. And Jamie is a student of the last cohort. Next slide, please. So the most important thing I can tell you, and this slide isn't mine, it's from Jack Westfald, who was one of the key people who set up this program before I even arrived in Colorado. And so, but this slide speaks to me so much as I've shifted from a STEM-oriented academic into a humanistic, community-engaged researcher, is that this is often what's happening, and the purpose of the CIT program is so that people who are coming, in our case, from the university, but this could apply to other types of organizations, to stop having this perspective of we're here to help, and obviously the slide speaks for itself. So next slide, please. Right, so let me give you just some administrative info and high-level info because the real meat is going to come after me. So this program, as I said, started way before I came to Colorado. I came to Colorado in 2015. This started in 2010. Basically, the idea, and this is what I love about it, is often as academicians, we feel like, oh, the community needs to be educated. It needs this, it needs that. We think we know, and yet I think that we need to hold up a mirror to ourselves and say, am I actually prepared to go into the community to do something that matters to them and to their aspirations? And so CBPR, community-based participatory research, is a particular academic term for a form of working with community that is taught in this community immersion training program. It's essentially funded through the NIH. I think we're on the 4th renewal. There are 5-year renewals. I think the last one is a 7-year renewal. So it's nice that the money isn't, oh, tell me what you've done in a quarter and we'll see if we give you more money. It's led by this program called the Colorado Clinical Translational Science Institute, which again is funded by a CTSA, Clinical Translational Science Award of the NIH. And really, this is what it's about, is to transform the way communities and researchers work together to design, co-design in this case, and conduct research by integrating the needs of the community into the research structure. And I would say aspirations, not just needs, because often needs takes a deficit mentality, and we're not interested in a deficit mentality as a whole. Next slide, please. And so these are, and I can't say enough about the community research liaisons, and we have 2 with us today, and they will say more, a lot more than I could ever say about them. But in a way, what I have come to learn about working in the community, with the community on their aspirations, is that this is a relational endeavor. And so the community research liaisons, to me, are the relationship holders with people in the community. And on the other side, they hold relationships with academics who aspire to work in the community. And so what they're essentially enabling is a relational instead of a transactional approach to working in the community. And the awareness change that can happen to students who go through this program is astonishing. And it doesn't come necessarily from reading papers, although we do that too. I personally feel like the transformation is when there's an opportunity to be relationally present. And this is essentially one of the key aspects that our community research liaisons make possible. Next slide, please. And so this is kind of like the nuts and bolts. These tracks have been running for quite some time, as you can see. I joined in 2017 as the academic director. I was invited over lunch by community research liaisons. I loved the invitation, I have to say. It's very different than invitations us academicians usually get. And I loved it. It was just endearing from the start. So generally, there's some academic reading and group discussions around those readings. So almost like a journal club. If you're an academic, you probably know what that means. It's just reviewing papers together. And then this is the piece that I hope you're going to hear a lot more about from our community research liaisons, because in the community immersion itself is where I think the greatest potential of awareness change resides. And I think awareness change is necessary. Then there's a post-immersion mentorship period. And then, of course, one of the main purposes of this work is to expand the network of academicians that are capable and willing and interested in doing this kind of work. And so here are the different tracks that have been offered and how many years they've been offered. And over these 39 tracks, 150 people almost have participated. Next slide, please. And so I'm not going to go through this in gory detail, but the point is to say, and by the way, there will be resources, as Leslie mentioned, that will be put in the chat where you can go more deeply, including access to a 10-year report about this program. But there are readings, there are community guides and members, like mentioned, the CRLs. A lot of what happens in community spaces, not in an academic campus. Community priorities are addressed. In other words, it's what is the community caring about at the moment, not what is it that the academician knows. Language justice is practiced throughout, and I would say also knowledge justice. There is a strong focus on social determinants of health. I like to think of social determinants of thriving also, so that we don't, again, accidentally look at a deficit model. Cultural considerations for research. This is very important. Understanding the culture of the community you want to work with and the history of what research has looked like there is incredibly important. Next slide, please. And so this is the kind of stuff that the NIH likes to hear about, and so therefore we report on it. And it's so, you know, there have been this many research participants, 122. You have, you know, pilot grants are offered for people who have gone through this. And then there are also partnerships that we track that get developed. And then obviously things like this matter a lot to the NIH. Oh, well, they have generated, after, you know, going through this program, this amount of total funding. And I think that while, of course, we all understand that you need money to do things, I also feel like our primary purpose isn't necessarily that. We would like to see as many people practicing this kind of work as possible. And of course, as I say, they need funding. But in my mind, it's not so much how much funding, it's the fact that people have stayed and gone forward in this model. And I would just say one final thing about that. In our work, somebody having an awareness change might lead to them concluding at the end of an immersion program that, you know what, now that I understand what this is, it's really not right for me right now. It's not right for me in this moment. It's not right for me in my particular situation, or whatever the reasons may be. That's a win. It is a win to clarify that the way you were thinking about doing research in community is different than what's really needed. And that once you learn about what's really needed, it's not for you. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Actually, that's better than having people doing harm in the community, by far. So there is no sort of understanding that, oh, if you don't, you know, if at the end of the program you decide this isn't for you, that's a win for everybody too. And I think that's very important to say. So that change of awareness can, of course, go in the other direction, and people suddenly go, oh my gosh, now that I understand what this looks like, there's so much I need to learn. Next slide, please.
And just, Bruno, just real quickly, I want to add that, and at least in these grants, the partnership development and the community researcher grants, we have set these up so that the community receives at least half of the funding, if not more. And that the financial aspect that for the community is run outside of the university, so they don't get stuck in the university's red tape.
Excellent point, Leslie. And so finally, the findings here, of course, and you'll hear more, you know, the community research liaisons are crucial. I don't think this program could exist in its current form or have the types of success it currently has if it were just somebody like me having journal clubs over papers in the field, right? Mostly that doesn't transform anybody's awareness. Although I have to say, Heather, when I watched your first foundations course for the first time, and you got to slide 3 or 4, and you said there are 2 averages, whose perspective are you trying to take? That was pretty awareness changing for me. Anyway, and then so you've heard about some of these other aspects, but let's look briefly at the challenges before I wrap up. So, you know, it is true that even once they have the awareness change, what happens? They go back into their institutions and they find that it's not always easy to work in this way. And so that's what these are talking about. There are all sorts of challenges and impediments, usually having to do with, you know, academic promotion and tenure processes and expectations that make it very difficult to practice this inside the university. And as Leslie just gave you an example, wherever possible or necessary, we try to do things in ways where, you know, the university weight doesn't impede the work, while of course benefiting from the advantages that the university creates by having access to students and other resources that might be really important. And like everybody else, we're still kind of struggling to come back up into grips with the post-COVID-19 pandemic world, if we want to call it that. Next slides. So I will hand it now back over to our community research liaisons, and I just want to appreciate very much the opportunity to give you the high level information. Thanks. Leslie, you want to, or Crystal?
Yep, I'm here. Thank you, Bruno, for the great overview of the program. Yate, Shea, Crystal, Loud Haki Initiative, Technizani Initiative, Bipatoni Bushish Team, Stay Nasta Dinasha. Hello, everyone. My name is Crystal Loudhawk Hedgebeth. I'm born for the Tango and Deer Spring people. I'm originally from Sanasti, New Mexico, which is located on the Navajo reservation. Next slide, please. And thank you so much for having us here today. So I have one slide, but I do want to share, I guess, my perspective as a community research liaison. I've been in this position, 10 years now. And the program has evolved, I would say, with change and with grant funding and awards and impact and outcomes. I feel like what we're really trying to do with the CIT program is really create a path of healing. And through the Immersion Program, we're able to do this by really bridging kind of the Western methods of science, and then for my community, the Indigenous science pathways on how we connect and honor our traditionals way of life. But so for the urban American Indian community, we focus in two different areas. We have one in the Denver greater area, and then we have a rural immersion that, depending on funding, will either go to New Mexico or Arizona to experience some of those cultural aspects. And something that I really like to do is not really provide structure or feedback regarding the academic sense of providing an immersion program, but really providing the cultural understanding of building some reciprocity, respect, responsibility, relationship, and representation in the research projects as you're moving forward, and how or what is being recommended by the community and what is seen as community engagement from their perspective, CBDR, because I know those aren't areas that are a great fit for everyone, but I think there are also opportunities though where you can really bridge this gap and come to some common ground. So for the Denver American Indian community, according to the 2020 census, we have the report is we have about 75,000 people who live in the Colorado, Denver metro area and Colorado Springs areas. Within the Denver metro area, about 50 of those reside in the 7 counties within the Denver metro area, and about 300 of them represent over, of those 300 represent different tribal nations across the United States. But we do have 2 federally recognized tribes here, which are the oldest residents of Colorado, which is the Southern Ute and Ute Mountain Ute. And through the program, it's set up a little different each year, depending on it depends on their interest. I would say the applicant's interest. We really do try to cultivate or provide an immersion program that fits their interests or what they're wanting to learn more about or who they're trying to connect in the community. So for my program, for the CIT portion of it, as I said, I really try to focus on the cultural aspects of it. So really talking more about and learning more about the history of Native Americans to Colorado. And a large part of that is the Indian Relocation Act of 1956 in the United States, and how that was intended to create a program for vocational training for Native Americans, but then now has largely impacted Native tribes throughout the nation as part of this program. And a lot of those people here are residents in the Denver metro area, but do have a real sense of connection back to their homelands. And so through the immersion program, we really want to provide, like I said, that common ground of interest. But more importantly, through their program, we want them to have takeaways and thoughts about what's happening in their research projects and how they can start to question and maybe inform and work better with communities that they are engaging with. And so some areas that tend to come up is really thinking about your role and the expectations you have yourself as a project leader. And then what is your role in community, and what is the community and vision for you as part of the partnership? I think it's also important to also think about the process and structure usually comes out of holding an immersion, and really thinking about those cultural aspects of saliva, hair, and how those connect and affect Indigenous people in regards to data collection and specimen collecting. Through the immersion program too, we've also heard that there hasn't been a lot of education in general about Native American people. So usually when people do the immersion program, are not really aware of a lot of the community organizations in the area that serve this community. And so really learning about how they can be more engaged with the community, and then how they might be able to give back to their community in terms of research. And then in terms of research too, one thing that we've heard a lot from past participants is thinking more about the timing and implementation and integration of the research project. So how can we engage them more? How can we make them more partners in possible research projects moving forward? In terms of the immersion program, we really talk about the community invisibility and the effects that some of the history still affects Native people today in terms of federal programs, housing, mental health, access to healthcare services, and then community investment and reciprocity through many of research projects. This isn't, I feel like, new knowledge, but there still tends to be helicopter research happening in a lot of these communities, and American Indian communities being one of them. And so it's really trying to improve and create partners and advocates through the research immersion training to have a better understanding of what our communities are, what our capacity is, what our limitations are, what our population looks like, and then what are some of the immediate needs or direct services that this community has, and then what are they not able to do? Because sometimes you might have research projects that come up and there might not be a lot of formal training in terms of the cultural aspects of the community. So really providing some of those cultural understandings and then identifying those early on really helps in organizing the project and finding that common ground, and then really defining and translating those to community in a way that makes sense to them, but then also meets the needs of the research grant purposes. And so through the immersion training, as Bruno shared, we've had tons of people go through it. It's been very impactful. For some of the examples I can give you in terms of the rural and the urban differences is, in the rural aspect, we're really able to take participants to the reservations and really have that deeper understanding of the culture, the limitations of resources, and the history effects such as uranium on tribal lands and how that has impacted food sovereignty, resources. And then in the urban community CIT program, it's really focused on introducing them to the local Native organizations and really thinking about the possible research projects if they're interested. But then it's really looking at traditional healing in an urban setting and how to support Native people in that way. And so I will pass it over to Leslie.
Thanks a lot, Crystal. I really appreciate all that you said. Some of it flows through all of the tracks and some of it is definitely specific to your track. Unfortunately, Charlene Borrientos Ortiz and Lorenzo Ramirez were not able to join us, but they tasked me with doing their slides. So I'm going to try and do my best. They do such a beautiful job, but we did wanted to show you some of the work that is done in the urban Latino, Latinx communities. The areas, this is one of the tracks that is offered quite frequently along with Crystal's. It's offered frequently because Colorado has a large population of folks from Mexico, from those have moved here from the California, the Chicano, and it spreads through a lot of different counties. So these are the areas covered. And let me just say, you will get these slides. I realize we're moving quite quickly through them and not really talking on what is on the slide. But so this is the area that the Urban Latino track covers. They are the largest group of color in Colorado, some native born, some recent immigrants, and some that have immigrated a while ago. The language spoken are English and Spanish with various dialects and also indigenous languages. And this is one of the most requested tracks along with the ones, along with Crystal's. This is just a slide to show you basically what it's like when we're actually in an immersion. The participants who are researchers, often junior faculty, spend a week of their time in community with the liaison and community guides. We often meet with a councilman because, for example, Crystal and Charlene Charlene and Lorenzo have close connection with the state and local representatives. Go out to the gardens and meet with people that are doing work in the field, in the gardens in urban Colorado. And then spending time on the road, going down to Pueblo, which is about a 2-hour drive from here, from Denver, to meet with specific people who have a lot of history and who are known as gatekeepers, in this case, George Ottoby, right here. So it's quite intense for the researchers, and they have to put their other lives on hold, really, to be honest. One of the things that Charlene wanted to impress upon us was that they, and as we all do, we talk a lot about ethnicity and measurement and language. She says here, we did not even exist. And often I hear her say that, let's see, we did not cross the border crossed us. And early on in the language, the timeline of language, she's indicated that pretty much everybody was called Mexican, and then Chicano became a popular term, and they are different peoples. Hispanic is more now the general term, and it was created and first used in the census in 1970, and Hispano is used sometimes as well. And then more recently, Latino has been around for a while, but Latina is Latin with the A, I can't even say what that is a gender neutral form. And we'll see that also with Chicano and Latinx, both of gender neutral forms. And then there's the indigenous terms for indigenous peoples. And then over on the right, her point here was that, let me just get to my notes, that the terms that are used by folks here in Denver are mostly these terms, but everybody is, everyone has a mix of different nationalities, identifying with history and culture, the intersectionality, meaning that we're more than a term, but living our lives and our experiences unapologetically. So what the point is this, is that when we go out and survey and survey our populations and our communities, it's really important to engage with them about how do we, what do we want to be called, or to allow them to write in, as we've talked many times in this Talking Data Equity forums. And so I'm going to go on and do the LGBT track, and I'll reintroduce myself. Leslie Wright, pronouns are she, her. I am based in Kaiser Permanente's Colorado's Institute for Health Research, where I'm a research project manager. And I also do a lot of community engagement, community-based participatory research through my connection with the university and the community research liaisons. This is I was able to do my first track in 2018, although the program started in 2010. Back then, it was hard. I wanted to do a track for the LGBTQ plus community. However, it was very hard to find an academic partner that had done a lot of research in the LGBT community, especially CBPR. So we had to wait until it became more common. And as most of you know, it is getting a little bit more common. Data is getting a little bit better, but not a lot better. This particular track was in 2018, where usually we do 2 tracks. One of them was the Native American track was running, and then the LGBTQ track was running. So this was the cover of the brochure. This is give you a shot of the agenda of just one day of a 5-day week intensive. And you can see if it starts later in the morning because it goes later at night. Again, these are researchers, often with families and other work, and they put those lives on hold to go through this opportunity. Quite a packed day. And then the next day we started again at 8:30 or 9. And what I try and do, and all of us try and do in our tracks, is really to look at the intersections as well. Yes, we are LGBTQ plus, but we come in all shapes, sizes, colors, ethnicities. And so I didn't just I specifically wanted to get away from I think the stereotype of LGBTQ plus being, white, often having more money. It Takes a Village is an amazing group that does work with African Americans, many of them who identify as same gender loving, and folks that are really seen on the margins, as well as many of our transgender brothers and sisters who are also people of color. And this is just to show you again, especially in the LGBTQ track, we try and understand what's happening with the youth over here. Rainbow Alley is a youth service program. That's their gathering space in the evening. Crystal actually got to introduce me to Ms. Montana Two-Spirit, and because of Crystal's connection with her, they live in part-time in Colorado. We got to spend a couple hours getting to learning more about the Two-Spirit community, what it's like, what it really means. It was an amazing experience, and that was thanks to Crystal's connections. And then always my heart goes out to the LGBTQ elders who are facing going back into the closet because of fear, perceived or real experience with healthcare providers not really understanding that they do exist. So these are some longtime friends of mine that we got to spend some time with. So that just gives you, we're going to give you a lot more in our 10-year report, and you can contact us. I'm going to turn it over now to one of our participants, Jamie Stutz, who participated a couple of years ago in one of the tracks, to give you the experience coming from a participant.
Thanks, Leslie. I appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about my experience from the other side of the CIT program. And just to give you a little bit of background, I'm a clinical health psychologist by training and a behavioral scientist in cancer prevention and control research. And I spent pretty much the most part of my training and career at the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville School of Medicine. But I grew up in central Iowa in a rural area. And so my career, go ahead and click next, please. is really focused on the implementation of lung cancer screening, as well as the development of novel lung cancer survivorship care programs with a focus on implementing these types of programs in rural areas to improve access and equity to the benefits of both lung cancer screening and survivorship programs. But in January 2020, had the opportunity to transition and move my research program to here at the University of Colorado Cancer Center on the Anschutz Medical Campus. And it was a really a great opportunity for me to take what we'd learned in Kentucky and move it to Colorado and test some hypotheses there. But as many of you know, there may have been a little bit of a disruption. As someone who has identified as a community engaged researcher for probably about 10 years in terms of working with rural healthcare systems, rural hospitals, rural communities, and rural individuals, this was a devastating blow to my initial excitement about meeting new partners and new collaborators and new opportunities in Colorado. And so when I saw the CIT program, I thought, what a beautiful way to try and catch up a bit, to engage a community of fellows who are similarly interested in rural investment and development and collaboration. And so I was able to apply and be accepted into the program to start developing relationships. And I think one of the things that maybe not touched on quite a bit is that in addition to meeting community, you're meeting other scholars or other students in the program who share a value system of an investment in energy and commitment to working with a community around equity topics. And so during that process and those the preparation period for being in the community, there's some strong relationships that developed there, and was only enhanced when we actually spent more time actually during the training program. Now for the rural program that I was a part of in southeastern Colorado, we actually spent a week and we traveled together. So it was a full-time investment of that week, and a really beautiful opportunity to take advantage of. I think Crystal and Leslie both mentioned different community programs and entities that we engage, but we met with some politicians, healthcare system leaders, healthcare system practitioners, with educators, with community members, with just a host of different entities to gain various perspectives on the opportunities and the strengths and perhaps some of the challenges as well. And one of the wonderful things that Jen Ancona, who was my CRL throughout the process, not only had a standard program of folks that she had developed relationships with, but she took each one of our expertise and interests and tried to develop specific opportunities around those to meet key leaders that could expedite collaboration potential. And so that was a really rewarding experience. And then while the plans were quite robust, there was also room for ad hoc things. And some of the additional richness that came out of the program were some of the hallway discussions as we navigated through a county health department, and suddenly the tobacco treatment specialist popped up out of his office, and we had a 15-minute discussion about that. And so being present in the community is important, and that richness came out in some of those additional things. So I just like to close and be happy to answer any questions about my experience, but with one more slide click, Leslie, that it really helped me expedite my connection with the community that I was longing to build and to start in 2020, but needed to be paused for pandemic safety reasons, but then to really start the process of putting down some roots and some connections, and to build those relationships that Bruno emphasized, and demonstrating an investment in this community in ways that could, enhance or demonstrate trustworthiness. I know we talk a lot about trust and mistrust and distrust and stuff, but I prefer to think about and behaviorally in terms of doing things to establish and communicate trustworthiness, and then allow trust to fall where it may after that. But if you act and do things in a certain way, and I think that focus is consistent with the CBPR approach. But I can easily say, and I've shared this with Bruno, Leslie, and Crystal, that this training program is the most rewarding experience I've had since joining the University of Colorado Cancer Center and the Clinical and Translational Science Institute about 3.5 years ago. And I am privileged by the opportunity to champion their program and share my experiences. And I will close there.
Thank you, Jamie. We're glad to have you. And we'll close with these. This was at the end of the week intensive. We ask our participants often to draw their impression of the week. And this, I can't remember which year this came from, but they all went together and drew what they felt they experienced in week immersion. And so this was something that we've kept a lot of the drawings. It's a really fun way to see what they get out of it. And then you realize that your perspective isn't enough. You need other people's perspective, that we all are shaded by our own perceptions. The more people that we can engage, the better our research is going to be. As I promised, we have resources that I can start putting in the chat when I stop sharing my slides, but you will get a copy of these slides along with the recording. And you are welcome to contact any of us. You may want to reach out to me first, and I can connect you to the others, or any of the other my colleagues on this call. And with that, I won't do the additional slides. We're going to cut to ending the slideshow and stop sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, Crystal, Leslie, Bruno, and Jamie, and I think there's a few other people from your team who have actually joined while you were presenting. So I don't want to leave, and the rest of the team who was able to join. You can now all see why I was so excited that this team would devote their valuable resources to spending time with us. I very much agree with the comment in the chat of how refreshing it is to see this, how thoughtfully your research initiative has addressed head on so many of the ways that ideas like this accidentally cause harm or accidentally reproduce the status quo while giving off the feeling or appearance of doing something different. Like, you've just taken so many careful, thoughtful steps, and I really, really appreciate it. We have a couple of questions in the chat, but before we get to the chat, as promised, if you would like to unmute and ask our team a question, this is when to do that. So if you're in the room and you want to ask a question, just raise your hand using Zoom, which is in the reaction section, or if you can't find that, you can just put in the chat that you want to raise your hand and unmute. So anybody in the room want to unmute to ask a question? And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to look through the chat. There's a couple of questions in the chat that are asked publicly, and a couple that were asked privately. And I think one of the ones that got asked quite a bit privately that I'll elevate is, can you say more, Leslie, or anybody on the team, but it was Leslie that brought it up, about how you were able to get money to the communities that were involved. First of all, was it hard to convince the funder/funders to allow you to do that? Second of all, how in the world did you not make it go through the university?
How did we not what? Sorry, was the last part?
Make it go through the university.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll let my colleagues too answer that. But the partnership development and joint pilots, the partnership development grant is one where basically it's like money to take have the researcher and the community members go out to coffee. It's really, we call it jokingly, the dating game grant. And then the joint pilot is if that relationship works out after about a year, 8 months to a year, then you can apply for more funding to actually start piloting a project that is of importance to the community. The funding comes from the Clinical and Translational Sciences Award that the University of Colorado has received now for, gosh, we're going on our fourth 5-year amount of money from that. So they have provided a chunk of those funds to our community engagement core, which I posted in the chat. And then the community engagement core takes some of that money and sets it aside for these partnership development grants, where all of us, our governing body, which includes community members, academicians, the CRLs, we wrote the grant, and we wrote the how the grant is going to be managed, and that community has to get at least 50% of the funds. So they're not huge. I can't remember, somebody on, I know Mary, I see, has been posting. I think they're like maybe 8,000 for the partnership development dating game grant, and around possibly, is it 20,000? I know we've changed a little bit for the joint project grant. So that came about because we demanded it come about, honestly. And unfortunately, leadership listened after a while. And then we worked with an organization called the Trailhead Institute that is a subcontract of the university, does a lot of work around with community programs and nonprofits. And they, in a sense, acted as the fiscal sponsor for the community. So that was very important to us to create that relationship. And it's worked out super well, much better than using the academicians are still paid for through the university's red tape. But we wanted to not make funding be a burden and lessen the burden as much as possible for community, because many of us know it can take up the whole amount. I hope that helps, and we can definitely tell you more.
That helps a lot. And I can already see some people replying in the chat, and it is so nice that there is a functioning, sustainable example that others can point to when they're told that this is not possible. Because I have sat in so many rooms where people are like, it's not possible. We'd love to, but not possible. And now we can say, actually, is possible, and has been possible for a while. So that is really, really, really good news. And I appreciate that. Another quite important question from the chat that I'm going to elevate is, of course, thank you for your thoughtful presentation. In what ways do you feel the CBPR challenges standard academic concepts of data ownership and governance? How do any of these differences translate into decisions about how research findings are shared? So that's actually two different questions, but they're really important. So what do you have a data ownership explicitly stated? And that's question one. And two, how do you think this is making a difference to how findings get interpreted and shared?
I'm going to let my colleague answer that question, so I'm not the talking head. Bruno, Jamie, Crystal, does one of you guys want to?
Yeah, so I'll take it on in the way it was asked, which is about CBPR, specific details about how it's implemented in CIT. I think, others can address. However, I think you're right, Teresa, I believe. It does, the CBPR concepts, as do action research concepts, liberatory concepts of research, which are quite common in places like Brazil, where I originally come from. They do challenge the notion that academics own the data completely, because the data isn't theirs, it belongs to the community. And so in CBPR and CBPR-like activities, the data belongs to the community, and it gets to decide what gets done with the data, or approve or not approve. Now, obviously, in the US, at least for academicians to participate, if you're using federal dollars, there's usually an expectation by the federal government that the federal government has the right to use the data. And so that would need to be, the right to use data, I don't think is impeded by a CBPR model, but it could be right to use data with approval pending from the data owners, rather than just use it for whatever you want, wherever you want, however you want at any time. But certainly Jamie and others, our CRLs and Mary, if you have specific things you want to share, I think it's a really important question.
I don't have much to add to Bruno's very eloquent response about data ownership, and I see it as a process of building on a relationship and negotiation, and not maybe not even negotiation being quite the right word, a mutual processing of what is best, what is going to do the best give the best representation of the community, expressing everyone's interest in the collaboration, and the academics have parameters that we need to fulfill. The community has parameters that they need to fill, and where can we have some agreements, and not producing anything or distributing anything on either side without the endorsement and the consensus of the group. And you can do that through advisory boards, integrating community members as members of the investigative team, co-leadership of projects and things of that nature, to make sure that we are not doing anything to derail or hinder the community with our academic needs and burdens, but rather it's hopefully a mutual celebration of the convening and the data generated and the results generated.
Thank you.
I still need a way to talk for 5 minutes.
I would also like to share too, I think it also depends on your community partner and the organization and their structure. I know that for many urban American Indian communities and organizations, some do have guiding principles and requirements governing research, especially human subject research, along with programming. But in rural partnerships with tribes, they do have a distinctive structure and timeline, and a large portion of, or all of the data would be governed by the tribe. So their process is different than what we would go to in terms of immersion for this program.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. Thank you for pointing that out, how it's an entirely different set of rules. And that is critically important when any kind of research like this is being done. So I really appreciate you renaming that for us. And I love the whole idea of, reframing the idea that just because an academic touched it doesn't mean that the academy owns it. When, that's a deeply problematic assumption. We have Victoria in the room with a raised hand. Please go ahead.
Hey everyone, good morning. Thank you so much for this. I have a question. So my work is around like civic engagement and all the intersections of all the different groups here in Arizona. So one thing that where it's new, so doing this work, right, just kind of, and we're in what y'all mentioned about like the critiques to academia, right? And then my role, I'm walking, a group of like community stakeholders, right, to like a super intro phase to community-based research. And one of the things that I'm grappling with, and maybe someone can speak to this, is like when you're doing something new and you're doing a lot of unlearning, and in the spirit of progress, not perfection, right? Like what happens when, in those points of tension, right? Or maybe how does tension come up, and with what people say, like right now, it's like, oh, it's not a need, it's this, kind of to not be in those deficit models. Like, how does that look like in practice, or maybe in your trainings, when those things do come up, when there's tension points, and just kind of working through those, or, you share findings, or people have, like feedback and just kind of working through those pieces. That would be something I would like to know more about.
Yeah, I can start with that. As definitely tensions come up. During the immersion process, we actually ask our participants to focus on listening and not talking so much, and be invited to ask questions. And that helps a lot. I think what really helps too, to be honest, is to have the meetings in community. It has a sense of humbling everybody's sort of way of being. And then when tensions come up, just really trying, if you are walking in both worlds, like many of us are, the CRLs, and it sounds like maybe you, really trying to play that mediator, that moderator, realizing that the two people come from different worlds, from different worldviews, and often there's no one right answer, helping each other work through seeing the perspective of the other. It's not always easy, but I think the most impactful thing is going ahead and trying to move through it, even though it's tough, because that builds trust on both ends, right? But yeah, it's a good question. What do others think?
I have some thoughts on this because I think it really depends on the stage of the relationship where you are. That tension early on could be killer, and possibly too soon in the relationship development phase, where you might not be able to get very far past it. If there's too much tension initially, it means that maybe there's not enough common ground. But the flip side of that is I'm gonna say that hopefully there will be tension as the relationship develops and there's more established trustworthiness among the groups. Then you start to see genuine disagreements that need to be addressed and worked through and negotiated and challenged, and different perspectives and people willingness to change their perspectives on things and see it from different perspectives. And sometimes it shades toward the predominant community perspective that was generated. Sometimes it shades to what the academics or what the researchers or the clinicians are bringing to the table. But if you can get to the point where there's that trustworthiness amongst the group, then I'm going to say you actually want tension in order to be productive. Not that it has to happen, but if it happens, it's not a bad thing. It may just signal that some really good discussions and really good outcomes are forthcoming.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Yeah, I just have one thing to add to that too. And I'll just share an analogy that Dr. Jones had shared with me, was that, it's like dating before marriage, right? You go through these ups and downs, and there'll be, you'll have individuals in your inner circle, individuals in your outer circle that really can affect your relationship. And I think it's the same way. It's all built on trust. I think communication and being very clear. I think from a community perspective, something that I think is really important is bringing them in early on and building those relationships before a project starts, if you don't already have those connections with community leaders, because that can really serve a purpose in helping you move through, and they can provide some great assistance and guidance on some of these challenges that may come up along the way. I mean, that's just definitely things that I have been through, and I think that's really important, is really looking at your relationships. And then I think on the academic side, it's helping them understand that community is not necessarily on their grant timeline, and that expertise looks different in community. And so, like, for my community, you said you were working in Arizona, it's like tribal healers, spiritual leaders, those, like, they have important roles in our community. And so they are experts in community, although they may not have a PhD. And so it's really looking at those different levels of expertise. We also have community members who are elders who might be you might ask to be part of an advisory board, that have been long time, who have deep connections and roots and knowledge and history to that community. So you want them to be they would be really beneficial to your team. It is a really hard role to play. It's definitely a balance. And I know that for you, at least I can just share, is I think for your mental health is just taking that time and really being realistic about what you can achieve and not over promising to community and not over promising to academics. I found that just being direct and upfront about where community are at has been helpful, because sometimes you are hopeful that you might have a higher data collection number for assistance, but there might be other contributing factors in community that are happening that really can affect data collection. And so I think just really being honest about some of those things, sometimes those are difficult to bring up, because I know I've been in those situations where, because you're writing the line, so to speak, and you have to live in that community. Like, for instance, I live in my community, I'm actively part of my community. And so you're also putting your reputation on the line along with everyone else's, but then these are longstanding relationships with community leaders that you have to work with even outside the research project. And so just kind of thinking about where those relationships are, and then helping academics understand that sometimes the timelines do need to be adjusted to help get the best numbers of resources for the project. And sometimes they just don't, even if you do have a structure, I think adding a little bit of time before an end is really important, and not just expecting community to be at their beck and call, I think is really important, because that tends to happen all the time. Is, we're brought in at the implementation stages of the grant. We really haven't had that time to develop relationships or even build or on relationships that maybe we haven't tapped into in a while. And now this research project comes up, right? And you're having to reconnect. And so just thinking about some of those things that could impact the project as well. I know it's hard. And it is really hard to walk those lines, because I know you also have, it's part of your position, but then your role is also important in community. And I think you just do the best that you can. But at least for me, I always, I worry about how I can provide resources directly to my community through this project. And so I think you also got to be an advocate for your community as well, because a lot of the time the researchers don't know the community they're engaging with. And so you will have a better level of understanding of what those resources are. And so it's really is, balancing and coming to that common ground. But I know this is hard work, so I appreciate you being there and working with all these different entities as you move forward. That was a great question.
Thank you so much, Crystal. I don't think you could have said anything better to help us wrap up today. I really, really appreciate the wisdom that you just shared, and the recommendations that definitely apply to the question that Victoria asked, but also really apply to the questions that we're all struggling with is, how do we do this? So I really appreciate it. And thank you all to the entire Colorado team for, first of all, the work that you're doing and the requirements that you're placing on changes in conventional research. And secondly, for being willing to share your very, very precious time with us. We will take the insights and examples that you've shared and make sure we do good things with them. So I really appreciate it. And to everyone else, thank you for coming. And we will definitely put the slides and the resources and the video up on the community forum. And we will be back here, same time, same Zoom link next Friday. So everybody have a great weekend. Take really good care of yourselves, and see you soon.
You do
Bye,
the same.
everybody.
Feel
Thank
better.
you, Leslie. Thanks, Leslie.
Thank
Bye.